As I'm sure you're aware, Toby Haydock's Time Travels Happy Times and Places episodes are released first for patrons some months ahead of their wider distribution, and so these episodes were recorded before the death of the actor Tony Caunter, who plays Morgan in episodes 2 to 6 of Colony in Space. And so Tony is referred to in the present tense throughout all of these, because he died on the 13th of October 2025, the day after I finished recording my commentaries on these episodes. So please bear that in mind. Tony was a wonderful chap, a really nice, friendly, open guy, and I had a great time in his company when I visited him at his home. And I'm sure we'll all remember him fondly, not only for playing Roy Evans in EastEnders, but for his 3 roles in Doctor Who, in The Crusade, in Enlightenment, and of course, in Colony in Space. Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, watch a Doctor Who story chosen by a friend of mine, and then I comment along and drop facts and observations and try to guess what my special guest's favourite thing about each instalment might be.
Hi Toby, my name is Simon Curtis, and as I record this, I'm producing on Doctors, daytime drama that's made in Birmingham, and the story I have for you to watch is from Season 8 and is Colony in Space.
Well, hello there, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of Colony in Space. And already the feedback for this one has been good. I think the regular listeners seem to enjoy it when I champion an under-loved story. And in fact, I've just taken part in another podcast, Hamster with a Blunt Penknife. They're strictly a version where they do a whole season and you have to vote in and out story. And I had to make a difficult decision with Colony in Space, one that I instantly regretted, and I'm regretting even more now because I'm doing the unusual thing. Quite often I just go into these because I've seen the story so many times that I kind of know what's coming. But with Colony, I haven't seen it for a while, and I was in a kind of pertwee mood. And what happened was, because of episode 1, where I missed, and I'm going to talk about this, I missed talking about Jo and her first visit to the alien planet and the fact that it is her first trip aboard the TARDIS, which is why she gets that new introduction in the book of Doctor Who and the Doomsday Weapon. And I was so I was so distracted, shall we say, by wanging on about that and how it frustrated me because it wasn't what would have been on the televersion. I actually didn't take into account what is in the televersion. So anyway, I having done episode 1 and regretted missing, the obvious best thing about it that Simon, our guest, chose, I thought, well, I'm going to watch that bit for fun now, and it's excellent, and it's very well played by Katie. And of course, the idea, it's very important, I think, when Doctor Who is set on Earth to underline and re-emphasise how, actually, yes, this is a story about space and that sort of thing, but most of us would not take that in our stride. And you need to have an element of, oh my God, now I don't think the Saywardian thing of moaning about it like you're moaning about having to go to the shops, but that thing of, this is not to be taken lightly. This is not something that happens to most people, and that if your companion is somebody who's supposed to be our ordinary point of view person, albeit ditzy escapologists with an uncle in high places, but nonetheless, Jo is our vantage point, if you like. Jo is our identification figure. That I think they balance that well, because she then goes on and has the adventure, but it's not just like, oh yeah, we're in space or whatever, but it's also not that I refuse to believe this until she gets she gets a laser gun in the face or something. So balancing that element of the Doctor Who format, I think, can be quite tricky. It's quite fun when Sarah Jane thinks everyone's doing a medieval pageant in The Time Warrior, but I think it does stretch credulity somewhat. And you don't, as I say, you don't want somebody you don't want it to be like a Scully situation in The X-Files, where she spends the first 3 years going, yes, despite all these things that have happened, I still don't believe there's anything paranormal about it. Ha ha. But also, of course, in that first episode, I talked about the Time Lord actors, because it's the first time we see the Time Lords since the City Gent Time Lord in Terror of the Autons, who's a Robert Holmesian comedy cameo, whereas these three are very much like the three who, and they're dressed in similar robes, who were in the War Games. I wonder if they ever thought about bringing the same actors back. You wouldn't have got. I don't think you've got the same actors back, actually, because the parts aren't big enough. But yeah, it's it's the second appearance of sort of Time Lords as we know Time Lords. At that point, the City Gent is an anomaly, and he's travelling to Earth incognito, etc., etc. So we see the Time Lords, and it's only the second time we see Gallifrey. So that was an important moment, and they do set up the Master, and so even though he's not in the episode, there's he's still a presence within the season. So there's lots to talk about there, and I think I wanged on about the actors. So just to show that even though we had quite a lot to talk about in episode 1 of Colony in Space, I didn't talk about some of the most important things, for which I apologise. Anyway, I've been watching Colony in Space for fun, and so I come to episode 2. I wonder if I've peaked. I wonder if I thought of all the interesting observations when I was watching on my sofa just the other day. So this is the second time I've watched this in a couple of days, but I am thoroughly enjoying watching the adventure, and I've loved the feedback. A few of you have taken the trouble to say you've particularly enjoyed this one, and as I say, I thought it was a bit substandard because I'd missed some bits out. So anyway, let's set sail for the planet Uxarius and see what on earth is going on in the Leeson's Dome, where the Doctor is investigating. And I've noticed I've got to be careful of spoilers. Oh, no, hang on. We're not going to do that yet because I have some feedback. Of course I do. That reminds me, once again, Susie Ferguson has come to our rescue, because Susie does not know the nature of the beast, the giant iguana that has terrorized the Leeson's Dome. I made an allusion to the fact that all is not what it might seem, and Susie is watching this story for the first time, so she's intrigued. But that means I've got to be careful not to give spoilers for future instalments. So I am bearing that in mind, and I am going to give you the feedback that I've had from episode 1 of Colony in Space from the listeners on Patreon. And if you would like your comments to be included, well, you have to be a paid member of Patreon, but that's only £3 a month, patreon.com/Toby Haydoke. And it also means that you will be listening to this way back in the past. If you're listening to this and you're not a patron, oh my God, it's pounds, shillings and pence time. Do you know what I mean? I think Henry V is king. It's ages ago. Anyway, there's quite a lot here. So what do people have to say about Colony in Space episode 1? John Hall says, is Colony in Space the epitome of the Target novelisation, being much better than the ads broadcast story? Or does another Pertwee novelisation deserve that distinction? I do think Colony in Space is very good. As I say, John, I struggled with it, one, on principle of it not having what I knew to be the correct introduction for Joe Grant, and two, I started reading these a bit too young, and I found the Terence Dix books easier. I didn't enjoy quite so much the playing with form and particularly the point of view stuff. I think I wanted my Doctor Who stories to be a bit more objective, whereas, of course, the great flourishes of Hulk are that he does alien and baddie and other people point of view very well. But I think I was a bit young for that. Obviously, when I read it again when I was older, it's a different kettle of fish, and I think the IMC chapter is superb. Jason Thompson replies to John, this one is definitely up there in those stakes. If only some of the stuff in the book had made it on screen, perhaps the tale would be more highly regarded. The background info about Earth, how the colonists traded to get what they needed, and the rather wonderful funeral scene from the part covering this episode, for example. Yes, the funeral scene, of course. Oh, you're making me want to read the book now, gents. I haven't got time. Right, Chris Williams says, haha, no way. I've just finished watching it about an hour ago. Serendipity. Oh, no, wait, that's another Pertwee. Ha! I just fancied watching a story I haven't seen in years, and that isn't that well regarded. Sometimes they're more interesting to watch than a stone-cold classic. It's unlike any other story in its season. It has a great cast, a good script, although it's 6 episodes long, it has that game-changing boost halfway through. So why isn't it better thought of? I can't quite put my finger on it. Is it the visuals? The alien designs make it feel slightly juvenile. But that combination of script and performance gives me my best two things about this episode. One, the already mentioned response to Joe being unexpectedly being cast away from Earth is maybe the most natural reaction since Ian and Barbara. No simply taking it in your stride even after 3 adventures of battling aliens. 2, the Leesons. In just a few scenes, Hulk and the actors give us a believable couple with a relatable backstory. They're fleshed out successfully and economically, so much so that when they are murdered you think, blimey, that's a bit rough, I quite liked them. You'd be forgiven in thinking they would have been around for more than half an episode. Points off for Rent-A-Ghost dematerializations and shoddy TARDIS interior. That wall that is blown up, a blown-up photo of Tablet Blister Pack should have stayed in the black and white 1960s. Mind you, the Master's TARDIS is even worse. Have a good look when you get there. One wall looks like a B&Q offcuts. Sorry about the long comment, but I'll have forgotten it all by the time we get to episode 6. No worries. Chris adds, P.S. I've never heard of done in terms of colour before. You are fulfilling your educational remit. Well done. Thanks, Chris. Yes, I didn't mention the dematerialisation either. The fact that it just sort of plonks, which is people have rationalised it, haven't they, by saying, well, it's the TARDIS is under Time Lord control, so it's just sort of grabbed and shoved rather than the gentle landing in and out that it normally does. Shane Plays says, done and moustaches. Are you sure you weren't watching Space 1999? Well, it is a bit Space 1999 in that regard. I never have understood the 70s sci-fi infatuation with beige/dun, the most egregious example being Star Trek the Motion Picture. How do you go from all the lovely colour of the original Star Trek series to that? OK, I'm done giving the poor old 70s a hard time. It is true that I wonder if it's because it was felt that perhaps too much colour was a slightly childish idea of space, and why would we go into space and be all excitingly coloured when actually most people who dress for work don't dress in, yellow jumpers, red jumpers and blue jumpers. But we've seen it more recently where sci-fi has decided to eschew the colour in terms, in favour of being dark and gritty, and we kind of like that because it made us feel all grown up. But actually, a bit of time between then and now then makes you go, yeah, but you are a bit po-faced and a bit boring. And actually, the realise we like sci-fi is because it's colourful and exciting. So I think there's a bit of self-hatred from the sci-fi and indeed the superhero community there, where we go, yeah, I know it's colourful for children, but I'm a grown-up and I want it dark because it's grown-ups, really. P.S. As soon as I finished this comment, you inquired if anyone had done the deed while listening to Happy Times and Places. I think Colony in Space has you seeing done. Ha ha ha. P.S. I've also been in a pertwee mood recently, and I'm currently in the middle of a rewatch of Inferno after Spearhead from Space and Sea Devils. I think my favourite pertwee is maybe Mind of Evil. Yeah, well, Mind of Evil's an interesting one. It kind of it's had an interesting history, really, and it exists in a particular sort of strange, empty space. But we will talk about Mind of Evil when I do Mind of Evil. Somebody has agreed to do that, but hasn't yet, and I know he's a regular listener and indeed a patron, hasn't yet done his contribution, but he's a busy man who has a very close relationship with the Mind of Evil, and let's no more be said. Shane Plays says, sorry for yet another comment after that longish previous one, but it's very jarring when the TARDIS just suddenly punches out and back in like that. Were they trying to save budget? John Hall says, if it weren't for the Master's TARDIS blinking out in the same way, I'd say it was a side effect of the Time Lords remotely operating the Doctor's TARDIS. Yeah, that's my story, John. And I've just ignored the Master bit. Maybe they remembered to release the parking brake. Haha. Jason Thompson says, no, it was simply that Michael E. Bryant forgot or was unaware that TARDIS was supposed to fade in and out when directing his first Who story. The same reason the closing credits sting is repeated after the reprise of the episodes in Day of the Daleks. New director, not fully au fait with how things are done, and nobody saying otherwise. Shane says, John, flippin' backseat driver interfering Time Lords. Jason, that blows my mind that no one would have pointed it out. Yeah, it does a bit, and if that happened today, we'd be furious, wouldn't we? We're like, those damn producers, but Terence and Barry let it go. James Cray Smith says, and James is good at minutiae, the thing is, I'm not sure how often the TARDIS dematerializes on VT in the 60s. Usually we're inside the TARDIS with the characters when it arrives somewhere. and when we see it arrive or leave from the outside, it's almost always on film, using a technique that wouldn't work on VT in the studio for Colony in Space. I'm not sure that there is a routine how things are done yet in 1971, amazingly enough. Well, it's for a better person than I to go back and see actually how many TARDIS materializations we've had and how standard the method is. Because, of course, we know in the Hartnell era that even having the materialization sound was not standard, and quite often it appears and disappears silently. Anthony Carroll comes in. My birth episode. I was born 2 days before episode 1. Loved the book. But when I finally got to watch it, was a bit underwhelmed. Too much repetition of colonists versus corporation. Master maybe did not need to be in it. Had some good moments and Pat Gorman galore. It's the worst story of the season. And what is to stop other corporation ships finishing later? 5 out of 10, says Anthony. Jason Thompson says another story that received fan wisdom of the 90s put me off bothering to watch until it came out on VHS alongside the Time Monster in that rather fetching tin. I can see why it gets a bad rap, but I rather like it for reasons I'll no doubt expand upon as we get further into the story. But for now, I'll say I like Joe's fearful reaction to the TARDIS. Everybody does. Yeah, all right. I chose the wrong thing. And being on another planet. And the country and the colony sets look like the kind of lightweight stuff you'd have if you just cobbled together through to make the trip. A case where the criticism of cheap-looking sets is hugely misplaced. Yes, they do. The domes are look like they're kits, aren't they? Which is actually very clever. My observation about the sets was just that they were sort of blandly coloured, which again they probably would be, so I don't think it's bad design, but I think it doesn't help the story not feel like it's a bit sort of dusty and brown. Nick Jocelyn Mellish says, I write this at the end of the 2025 Festival Fringe. Sorry to tell you that moustaches haven't made a comeback here yet, though men shouting at one another in cramped rooms in the name of drama has. Swings and roundabouts. I think the solo moustache is definitely more prevalent on the comedy circuit than it was, say, 10 years ago. I think there's a certain type of quite sort of media man that is very much the solo moustache, top button of the shirt done up but no tie combo. I'm not minding the moustache, the top button with no tie combo. It makes my teeth itch. Anyway, Andrew F. I speak as somebody who can is in a glass house, so has no right to be throwing anything, not even a paper aeroplane, let alone any stones, as far as fashion is concerned. But anyway, delighted you're covering this one, says Andrew F. I do feel it's rather unappreciated. I stand by my belief that there isn't a bad story this season. The scene between the Doctor and Jo, where she says she's afraid and wants to go home, that one I didn't choose, and the Doctor explains this is why he travels, is just brilliant. So wonderfully played by both. Simon Curtis says, go with your instincts, Toby. I want you to win this. Well, I mean, I'd have had my instinct to that, Simon, if I'd not been talking rubbish during the TARDIS scene. So it's a shortcoming of the format, but hey ho. Jason Thompson says, but it's very nice of Simon. This is Simon who's the guest. It's very nice of Simon to want me to win. Right, so he's obviously not going to go for anything too tricky or too personal, I would hope. Jason Thompson, on a technical note, was it intentional that your usual intro is missing? Oh, no, this is, I think the one I put out for Patreon didn't have the welcome to Happy Times and Places, so I need to go and redo that. So no, it wasn't intentional. Yes, it was actually because it was under the Time Lord's control, Jason, and it was a new director who wasn't familiar with format, and so that's how he did it, and none of the producers pointed it out. But unlike the later release of Colony in Space, I will correct that. David Gillespie, but thank you. See, this is what I don't tell you about the Patreon is what patrons do is they pay money to get early access and to get their comments on the podcast. But they also act as a sort of buffer for the first release, which has usually got some sort of mistake, and they very kindly point it out, so I correct it when it gets to you a few months down the line. So you may have to wait, but at least you don't get the bad version first. I'm not sure that's the advert. I think it is. David Gillespie Pratt says, good to see that it's some time for some colony love, but that might sound a bit rude. It's not a story I rush to put on if I'm in a season 8 mood, but it's perfectly enjoyable. I think I was thrown by the poor quality copy UK Gold used in the 90s, with a blue tint on the titles, and the captions were white, not yellow. The silly things our fan brains pick up. I await your reaction to the Master's Bakewell tart of death later in the story. Jack Sharp says, I watched this recently as I'm going through Doctor Who with a friend who's never seen the show before. We just watched The Time Warrior yesterday. Lucky you and your friend. Honestly, this story isn't as bad as people say. I think it's another classic example of this really could have been a 4-parter. Yeah, I mean, and it's not alone with that, is it, Jack? And John Hall says, in fairness, most Pertwee 6-parters could easily have been 4-parters. And yet the 7-parters don't have that issue. Interesting, isn't it? Matthew Toot says, hi, Toby. I always listen to Happy Times and Places on the train. It's a 4-hour journey from York to the Lake District, and I do that frequently. Regarding Colony, well, hello, Matthew, and I hope you're listening to this on the train and having a lovely time. The Lake District, we go there sometimes. Shirley's brother lives there, so she has a family tie there, and it's a lovely place. Regarding Colony, I do find it a bit unexciting, but also so cosy. I think the Lake District is unexciting and cosy, and I like it for those very reasons. Watching this all warm inside on a winter Sunday afternoon is ideal, definitely. In fact, Shez's brother has some utes on it. You know, he's got a bit of sort of stark wasteland by his cottage, and he's put a couple of utes up. So we it's sort of socks in bed kind of time. But I think I said socks, but I think it's the ideal. That would be the ideal situation for me to watch Colony in Space. Except Shirley would probably stab me to death. Robbie Carnegie says, it's interesting that you say you like it when the TARDIS is picked up and moved around. I'm the opposite. I always feel it makes it look like the prop that it is. Surely it would be amazingly dense and impossible to pick up. Oh, well, maybe that's just me. No, I can see that as well, Robbie, and I think that my head is probably with you. But my heart, or maybe just my eyes, I just sort of like the image. I think the TARDIS is such a brilliant prop that it can look rather sweet and incongruous being put into different situations rather than just sort of landing. So maybe it's that. But no, I think my head is with you, and that it should actually be innocent looking, but then when you try to do anything with it, it hums and vibrates and is impossible to pick up. So no, I'm with you on that. You've easily changed my mind, or made me think two things at the same time, which is possible to do, but increasingly seems to be less common in the public debate sphere. But let's not get into that. Mark Trevor Owen. I first saw this story in New Jersey, USA in 1991, where I was an exchange student. The local PBS TV station, the ad-free channel, was working their way through the Pertwees in omnibus form. This was shown without a break, in ropey as cuddle monochrome and with a wobbly soundtrack, in a primetime slot on Saturday night, which I think is an example of why a lot of American people make jokes about PBS. It was like watching a Doctor Who story made by Sergei Eisenstein in 1931, not Michael E. Bryant in 1971. I think this strange introduction is why I've had a fondness for this often overlooked story. On a different note, and with my anorak zipped right up to my chin, is it just a coincidence that you're following up your examination of the Ark with an episode of Happy Times and Places that discusses the first published novelisation to mention the monoids? Yes, it is. And do you know what, Mike, if you hadn't pointed that out, because I haven't read the Colony in Space book for 30 years, I shouldn't think, I wouldn't have remembered that. So Good work. With your anorak has provided some extra content for this podcast. Nev Fountain says, talking about buttering up old actors to get a performance, it was my first radio sitcom, Son of Santa, and my star, Mr. Father Christmas himself, was Ron Moody. We had a day's rehearsal before the evening show in the radio theatre in front of a studio audience. Ron was a little tetchy, not difficult, but not exactly enthusiastic either. Apparently he hadn't read the script and thought it was a children's show. During lunch in the BBC canteen, I sat down with him and told him how much I admired his performance in The Mouse on the Moon, a sequel to A Mouse That Roared, a movie in which Peter Sellers played a lot of the parts. For The Mouse on the Moon, he was replaced by Bernard Cribbins, Margaret Rutherford, and for the main villain, Ron Moody. I told him, in my opinion, he was better than Sellers, and he purred like a kitten. For the evening show, he gave the performance of his life, and the audience roared. There you go. Nothing like a little tickle under the testicles to get an old thespian's juices flowing. Oh, Nev speaks with the experience of a wily media operator, an excellent writer, and clearly a fine judge of how to get the best out of members of the theatrical profession. Thank you for that story, Nev. If only Ron had said yes to Doctor Who, that would have been a story about the Doctor himself. But anyway, brilliant. Thanks, Nev. And Nev is back. There are so many reasons to love Malcolm Hulke, but I do sympathise with Terence when he said he enjoyed working with Bob Baker and Dave Martin more. Malcolm has his strengths, but he does have a love for the same plot, i.e. Colony in Space is the first time a baddie uses a fake monster to scare people, but not the last. Frontier in Space has the Masters Projecto Fearotron, and Invasion of the Dinosaurs has the Super Dino Time Scooper. The only show that used this concept more was Scooby-Doo. Ha 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 ha! Oh, I want Captain Dent to say I'd have got away with it if it hadn't been for those meddling colonists. Susie Ferguson, yay! This is becoming a bit of a catchphrase now, but another one I haven't seen. Hooray! And I'm so happy it's a Pertwee one. Last time I decided to watch a Pertwee story with HT&P, Inferno, I enjoyed it so much that I ended up watching the entire season in a single weekend. I was on a work weekend residential, and I absolutely loathe networking, so I was only too happy to retreat to my room after dinner and watch the action Doctor in, well, action. I'm delighted. I too, Susie, am a terrible networker, so I'm entirely identifying here. It's been mentioned before, but I really loved Joe's reaction to being taken on this trip. Everybody did, Susie, except for me, because I'm an idiot. It's very unusual to see a companion have this reaction to a journey in space and time, and it really stood out to me as an interesting point in the episode. I did laugh at the monster being a big lizard. I do love it when in the sci-fi when a monster is just an animal blown up to humongous size. But from what you said about this not actually being a monster, I'm now very intrigued. What is going on? Looking forward to finding out. Oh, Susie, and I think we've already given away something about the story in the comments. I'm so sorry about that. I'll try to be mindful of the fact that some people will not have seen the episodes, because not for my own benefit so much as I think you will enjoy the episodes more if things are a surprise, and I try to stay spoiler free with new Doctor Who for that very, very reason. Although it's really hard these days, so I am conscious of that, Susie, and I will try to comment on the episodes, which is why the setup of this is that people are responding to episode 1 and maybe looking forward to episode 2 when these comments are read out. But obviously people do refer to stuff later on, but I will try to confine my comments to what is happening in the episode and not to throw forward with assumed knowledge, because of course that's what the viewers at the time would have done as well. But look, we are now going to head over, even though I've been talking for as long as the episode lasts. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I suppose you are here to listen, and listen you must as I head over to a BBC iPlayer, and I am going to press play on Doctor Who and Colony in Space, which I always knew as Doctor Who and the Doomsday Weapon. And the placeholder picture has a giant claw, which, if it belonged to a monster, would look a bit fake. But is that the idea? In 3, 2, 1. Here we go. So, yes, it was, because obviously the titles have been redone for various remastering purposes, but I do seem to recall that this was a slightly washed out looking thing, and again I'm not sure if that's to do with America or whatever, but I trust the restorers to be sticking to the colour code that was used at the time, to adhere to how it was actually done. So here we have. Now there was a lot of publicity pictures of Pertwee lying down and with the mining robot's arms above, and I think there's a picture of it in the book as well. So this was quite a well-known image of the IMC robot arms aloft. It actually moves not bad for a robot, and it's John Scott Martin inside there, of course. But there are certainly photos of Pertwee lying down, and I think his nostrils were captured in their full glory, their full-flared glory. And I believe he objected to one of those pictures being used on a poster. Some Richard Bignell, I think, showed me some correspondence, if not from Pertwee, but from his agent Barry Letts, saying, "Yeah, let's not. We don't particularly want these shots used because they're not as flat." John was a bit conscious of his nose when seen from underneath. I wonder how he discovered that his nose from underneath was not the best place to look at it. But anyway, who cares? Because here is my friend Bernard Kay playing a very benign character, and he exudes sort of gentle goodness. Bernard was actually quite a cantankerous chap, but he's a really, really good actor, and I think these sorts of slightly weak characters with a conscience can be very hard to sympathise with because they can be a bit too easily manipulated and so therefore frustrating and a bit too nice to be interesting. But I think Bernard is such a solid presence and such a thoughtful and intelligent actor that Caldwell is a great character, and I was absolutely delighted because of course he doesn't come in till this episode 2. He was always, now Bernard could be quite critical of his fellow actors and fellow man and fellow everything. He had a tough upbringing, Bernard, and he was good company and good fun, but it meant that if he could sort of go, I thought that was a bit rubbish, or I thought that didn't work, it wasn't far away from him, and I that comes naturally to me if I'm not careful, and it's only when you experience it from somebody you like talking about something that you like that you go, oh no, you don't actually need to be like that. But he did have a point with this, is that he thought it was ridiculous that John Pertwee drove the car because he's a prisoner, but John Pertwee wanted to drive the car, so John Pertwee, as the star of the show, got to drive the car. Ha ha ha. I suppose the argument is Caldwell couldn't keep his gun on the Doctor and drive at the same time, and the Doctor could jump out or whatever, but we do see, I think, Tony Caunter driving it later. But yes, I do see the point, because Caldwell could have put him in handcuffs, of course, or something like that. So, or strapped him to the dashboard. It does stretch credulity, but John Pertwee wanted to drive the car, and he plays Doctor Who. But what's fun is that, because in all cast lists and the episode guides and in the program guide, it doesn't give the cast list in order of importance. It gives the cast list in order of appearance, which is why I would sometimes get annoyed with certain Doctor Who books, which when they go guest stars include, and they just choose, I think in whichever Peter Haining book it is it 25 Glorious Years, that just lists 2 or 3 actors. I think they list David Webb and John Lyne because they're in episode 1 and they appear early on, because the cast lists are done in order of appearance. And if you've never seen the story or you don't know your Doctor Who, you just go, oh well, I'll just choose the first 3 that appear on the cast list. But most cast lists available were in order of appearance, so all the IMC men in episode guides and things appear quite low down because none of them appear till episode 2 at the earliest. So 3 of our very important guest stars, Bernard Kay, Maurice Perry and Tony Caunter, are quite low on the cast lists that appear in magazines, etc. So I had no idea, and nor did Bernard, until I watched it, which was long before he did, and he watched it for the DVD commentary. But when I first saw it, when I first got it on video, that he gets top guest billing, and he said, I was a bit surprised by that. I went, well, you're Bernard Kay, and he was like, oh. But it's delightful for me because he's he plays Saladin, which is an important part in the Crusade, but Julian Glover's your main guy there. He plays Crossland in The Faceless Ones, but you've got Colin Gordon and Wanda Ventham, and who I think probably outrank him there. Dalek Invasion of Earth, I think he's probably entitled to be a main guest star there, but he's not. No guest stars are billed in the Radio Times for Dalek Invasion of Earth. Only Julian Glover is billed in the Crusade. Bernard does get mentioned as one of the guest stars of Faceless Ones, but he's behind Colin Gordon and Wanda Ventham. But here, top guest billing. It's only a little thing, but I like it. I think it's it's when you get that in your career, I think you're able to go, oh, that's nice. And I was in something recently where my name appeared at the front of the program, which just, I mean, and that's because it's a director who's particularly nice and generous with actors, I think. But it's just the optics that make you feel in a profession that is full of rejection and disappointment that, okay, I deserve a bit. I deserve my name in font. And here we have. Oh, I'm so lucky to have met all these guys. Tony Caunter, who plays a lot of villains. Late casting for Susan Jameson, who was originally supposed to be playing Morgan, which would have been, I think, really interesting casting, and we would have had a cold female villain. But isn't it extraordinary that in 1971 a female villain was done? I think they were worried it was kinky, and this is a show suitable for children, but the idea that a woman could be bad would have a sexual element to it. I mean, an attractive woman, sure, Susan Jameson, who is the wife of James Bolam, and a very attractive woman. But the idea that would be too much for the dads. The dads can have a sort of young, plucky companion to like looking at in a short skirt, but not a slightly older woman all dressed in black and with a machine gun. That's the wrong sort of allure. But that speaks so much to sexual politics and how women were viewed, even by liberal, decent producers and all of that sort of thing. It's just interesting how our attitudes change sort of without us knowing it. I love this Malcolm Hulke thing of telecasts in the future, and yeah, basically, I mean, it's quite simplistic, isn't it? But yeah, you have a look at that, and it's just all violence, and it's horrible, and it's a real turn off. But there is an element of how we are drawn to violence, and it inures us to it. And so this future is one where human life and violence are sort of slightly more expendable, and money is more important, which is what IMC are all about. Through little hints of it in this story, it's much more front and center in the book, but I guess, like Susan Jameson, you couldn't be too on the nose because that is for children, but it's there if you want it. And I think if you come to it with the book in mind, you perhaps see it more. But I love these actors, and it's the three character types, isn't it? It's Tony Caunter as the sort of sadistic sidekick, the bad, the nasty factotum, the muscle. Bernard Kay as the conscience-stricken, decent man, but who's got his own issues, and the majestic Maurice Perry as the inscrutable Captain Dent. He's brilliant. He's one of those villains that doesn't have to do very much at all. And I love Maurice. He was a terrific actor, an actor of great style, who could do eccentric if he wanted to, and he himself was actually a much more demonstrative fellow than these sort of cold parts that he plays. But he did cold, formal villainy very well, and he played those sorts of formal parts in things like The Sweeney and Special Branch and things like that. But he too could be quite. He was a fascinating man. He was learning Russian at 94, but he was quite a cranky character in his own way as well. But he was still. And he and Bernard Kay were friends. They worked together quite a lot, actually, but were also neighbours. But they were friends like men were friends in the 1970s. In that, I think there was a bit of competition. There was a bit of. Bernard once said that Maurice had accused him of being pedantic, and Bernard said, if anyone's more pedantic than me, it's Maurice. But they were both in the Survivors episode together as well, Mad Dog, which Maurice gives a fantastic performance as a guy who catches rabies, and Bernard is the heavy in that, and that was actually what Bernard was making just after his wife Patricia Haynes died, which was something he never quite got over. So yes, it's a small world, this acting world, but it does mean that this supposedly underwhelming story is thesped up to the gilt, and I do like this Malcolm Hulke thing of idea of what they call it, a galactic slag heap, don't they, as well? Just it's a slag heap from space. He's very good at your health, sir. He's very good at he calls people sir, doesn't he? Hello, sir. To be formal, but he takes no mess. So Captain Dent has to be sort of quite pleasant, but he's not unctuous, isn't he? He's not sucking up to him. He's being pleasantly formal, but there's a steeliness there. Steeliness Maurice Perry could do very, very, very well. And Tony Caunter's a lovely bloke. He lives on the coast, former Navy man. Of course, he was Roy Evans in EastEnders for years. But Caunter had also been in Colony in Space. He is in Colony in Space, in The Crusade. So Michael Bryant using him and Bernard Kay, because he was a PA on The Crusade. So he's using actors he's used in Doctor. He's worked with in Doctor Who before. But Tony's one of those actors who might be in something in a couple of scenes one week, and then the main, big main guest heavy the next week. He had a very, very strong career as a very recognisable character actor, and then I think was pretty much stopping when the EastEnders offer came through, and he ended up being in that for about 11 years. Married to Pat. So what a great gang. But I like the relationship between these guys, and the fact that they speak in sort of euphemism about about sending the necessary equipment and all of this sort of thing. I think it's look, I love the way that these two have an understanding that actually Caldwell is completely oblivious to, or chooses to be oblivious to, but they speak in euphemism, they speak in suggestion, and that makes the villainy rather more enjoyable, because you're picking up on it as a viewer. You're reading between the lines, although it's not actually that subtle. But for this kind of television, I think it gives it an extra layer of slyness, which is quite enjoyable. Pert was really testy, isn't he? I forget about this. My friend Tom came round the other day and confessed that he had to stop worrying, admit that Pertwee was his favourite. Pert was never quite been my favourite, and I don't know why. And I know some people think of him as this utter sod, and because he is really testy and he is annoying, but because he's such a naturally flamboyant presence, you kind of forgive it. But again, it's again very sort of 70s male, isn't it? Where there was, and a lot of those old actors that I know that had their pomp in the 70s did have there was a kind of sort of masculine thing going on, where you suspect that there was quite a lot of caustic conversation and swagger and all of that we don't do anymore, and I don't mind. It's a sort of masculinity that was allowed to prosper, maybe a little bit too much, and it didn't make them happy. I mean, I know again a lot of those old guys who you would think had the time of their lives, drinking and smoking and shagging, but they all ended up sort of slightly disappointed because it goes, or maybe it doesn't give you the happiness that you want. But it's interesting seeing it as a sort of outsider, as a man from 20 or 30 years down the line, and I've had my own problems with smoking and drinking, whereas I've always been marvelous at the let's not get, but I think of a slightly different caliber. I think you had to be a bit more macho and masculine back then, and of course we're a bit more complicated than that. But if you allow masculinity to flourish unfettered, it probably doesn't reflect well on us. Anyway, here's somebody who reflects very well, John Ringham, who is delightful and gentle, and this is John Herrington, who worked with Bernard Kay on an episode of Colditz. He did more than one episode of Colditz, Herrington. Bernard did not, but we'll maybe talk about that later. But John Herrington was actually, I think, was German, and had a slightly different name. It was Johann Hertzler or something. But he's one of those actors that always look quite old because he's got that sort of slightly raspy delivery. And he plays Jim, of course, Jim Holden. So we do get the line later on, Jim will fix it, which is not something you can normally say with anything related to the BBC, but I can, because I'm talking about Jim will fix the electronic equipment in Doctor Who and the Colony in Space. But John Herrington is the scientist It's a pretty similar part, actually. He's got a very avuncular, affable vibe going on there. With the mice in the Daleks' master plan. Is it Freun or Rimnal? I think it's Rimnal. Freun is Bill Mylan. So yes, and he's the doctor, isn't he? In Colbitch, the German doctor. And he plays quite an important part in the episode that Bernard is in, which is the best and a classic episode of Colditz that Bernard is fantastic in. Such a good performance. Winton's an interesting character, isn't he? Because he's the sort of he's seen as the lead colonist over Ash in terms of importance to the story. He's Pennell is credited above Ringham, even though Ash is the leader, because Winton is the kind of heroic character, but again, he's quite sort of tough and uncompromising and headstrong, and he causes as much trouble as he solves. And actually, I think, although we do like Winton because he's brave and all that sort of thing, I think we sympathise more with Ash, and I think Hulk in the end probably shows us that Ash's kind of bravery is preferable to Winton's. I think this subplot with Norton is excellent, and it's great to see Roy Skelton getting a proper slice of the action where he's not having to put on a silly voice or do any of that. And I think this is a really good mysterious subplot. And I love the lights being off as well. Give this a superb atmosphere. And there's a couple of bits. I think there's a bit in that scene that we saw that hadn't existed until they were doing the Blu-ray, and I think they compared various different prints, and there was a couple of seconds extra that had. Or has it been cut? Oh, Peter's going to come in and say now that it had been cut from the UK broadcast, but made it to an overseas broadcast. Anyway, we had a bit of missing Colony in space on the Blu-ray, but I'm still catching up because I need to leave a gap between my contribution to the Blu-rays and me actually taking them out of their cellophane. So I need to catch up with season 8 yet. But there was certainly something when they were prepping the various different versions of this where they found a little bit of extra footage. But and I think there's a bit, isn't there, with when Jane Leeson gets her close up in episode 1, that the quality changes just slightly because there was actually a bit longer of it that should have existed. But Maurice Perry, he for years looked after his wife, who was very poorly, Maggie Ashcroft. So he was a sort of carer. But I went to the pub with him, but he wasn't a big drinker, so it wasn't like I didn't. So yeah. But then we didn't keep in touch hugely. But then when his wife died, he sort of rang me out of the blue, rather lost, I think. But anyway, we had a nice old chat. Yeah, he was good. And he came to Bernard because when Bernard died, because they'd been mates, I let Morris's agent know about Bernard's funeral because I wanted people to be there. And Morris came, and I met him. I met him between the tube and the crematorium. I went, "Oh, excuse me, are you Maurice Perry?" And he said yes. And I explained that I was the guy that had called him. And and then Julia Crampsey, who's a BBC casting director, noticed because I think we were both. Were we both carrying a rose? Because we'd been asked. Bernard asked that everyone bring a red rose to his funeral, or did they get given out? And anyway, she noticed us and realised we were probably going to Bernard's funeral. So she said, "Excuse me, you go to Bernard Kay's funeral?" So we all walked up along the road, and I'm glad Morris made it there. And yes, we did all have red roses. I think they might have been given out. And it was very funny because Bernard was 86 when he died, and Maurice Perry said, as we were walking, he said, was he only 86? And I said yes, and he gave us sort of his face crinkled in sort of very naughty triumph because Maurice was a bit older and had outlived his old sparring partner. So there was a bit of joy there, and I love this relationship that these two have, and I like that. you're up to your ears in debt. I like it when... Now, Doctor Who can sometimes be a little bit too prosaic in its characters' motivations when you're dealing with outer space stuff. But I also like it when the show introduces realism, like, well, a character's motivation is not because he's from a planet of sad people or this, or because he's, you know, his one characteristic as a two-dimensional character is that he is like this. But this is a guy who's has to temper his desires with his motivations, with the circumstances in his life, and you're up to your ears in debt. Well, we all know that. Kids might not, adults watching will, but it's introducing, you know, soft adult concepts into kids drama, and I think that's very good. And I like the way that they've decorated the set with lots of different scratches, which is of course part of the damage left by the creature. I'm aware that Susie Ferguson might be in for a bit of a surprise now. I mean, it is a bit similar to the ending to episode 1, except this time the robot's got claws on the end of it. But it is an ingenious idea, and of course you have to end the episode on more than just the action of the monster coming in. So what better way to do it than to give the character a line saying, "Yeah, I'm sorry, it's business, not personal." I think that's a great line, and actually, you know, the whole story could be that it's about business, it's not personal, which is the sort of eternal thrust of a lot of what Hulk is writing about. But look at all those brilliant actors. I mean, every one of those actors has a story to tell us. Every single one of them. Primitive and voice Pat Gorman. He didn't do the voice in the end, but we see Pat in various different guises, you know, throughout this story. So keep an eye out for the many faces of Pat Gorman. But I'm going to have a think now about what my favourite things are in this episode of Doctor Who, because I was doing a lot of talking about the actors then and not much about the action. I've been caught out that way before. Well, I suppose the first thing, and I didn't actually talk about this within the episode because I got distracted talking about actors. What a surprise. Is that when I watched this through in preparation for this, I loved the relationship between Holden and the Primitive. And I know there's some unease as we engage in ever more post-colonialist angst with the portrayal of indigenous peoples as being primitive compared to us. But obviously, societies do evolve at different rates and also have their own ups and downs. You know, the Roman Empire was more advanced than loads of other places around, including us. But, you know, ebbs and flows and rise and falls. So it's not a linear progression either. And actually, what Hulk does very cleverly with this is that he shows that actually these primitives have become primitive because they are a society that was so much more advanced than we have ever been. And so he's not saying, oh, yes, humans are the dominant and the cleverest species. He's saying, it's almost like saying, you know, be careful of how advanced you get, because you could get reduced actually to a state of, pre-industrialization and pre-technology. And in fact, the technology that you have might spell your doom. And also he gives the primitives, and again, I think we get a little angsty about this, and I don't think we should, different faculties. So yes, okay, they're not civilized in the way that we understand it, and yet they have they have, you know, psychic faculties that have developed more than ours have, and so that means that, yeah, they're not backwards. They have different skills, if you like. But of course, they're spear wielding and mute, so that can cause some people, I think, looking to worry about such things, disquiet. But I think, again, as with a lot of our discourse about our past and our media and our portrayals and our attitudes, I think we need to get over ourselves a little bit and not be in the mire of always looking for something to cast aspersions on our own Western civilization, which actually has plenty going for it and has plenty of things that we benefit from that we shouldn't be too keen to. We shouldn't let ourselves off the hook for any shortcomings, but I think we're too keen to find them wherever we can at the moment. That's the way our current discourse is going, rather self-flagellating, liberal self-loathing. So I think Hulk is intelligent enough to be playing with that trope of the, in inverted commas, primitive, and he was interested in different civilizations and peoples, and was himself very hard on the Western civilization and the country in which he was living at the time. And I think so. I think he plays with that and gives it a science fiction twist, where actually they're the product of a very advanced civilization, which we will find out more about in later episodes, without, I think, they're spoiling anything for Susie, I hope. But I like that relationship that they have, where there's a, and they say, she says it was his friend, and Norton exploits mankind's problematic relationship with people that aren't alike we are, by going, oh no, it's actually they're you turn your back and they will kill you, and he's not entirely disbelieved, even though, as they say, but they were friends, he was his friend, and that turns out that was actually true, and it was Norton exploiting the possibility that lurks in our subconscious that somebody different from us might turn on us or whatever, whereas actually the truth in the story is actually no, the primitive was benign and he was Holden's friend, and they both died together, which is murdered by a malignance in their midst. But what that means is that you have this very sweet relationship between the two of them, and I love the way that John Harrington goes, thanks, when he passes him the screwdriver or whatever it was. And it's such a lovely piece of casting, because he's got such a warm presence, Harrington, and I do like the addition. I do like his whiskers as well, that he doesn't have in the Daleks Master Plan, or certainly not in Colditz. But he's a one-episode character, and I think he's rather sweet. And I also like the idea, because I like anything that's about sort of pioneering and working against the odds, and different groups, people coming together and playing to the strengths of those people in order to benefit from the whole. So I like that idea that Holden's the only electrician, technical guy we could persuade to come along, because it's all very well, we could get loads of hippies who want to toil the land, but to get somebody who's good at electronics, that's going to be a harder sell, because they're going to be more wedded to technology and more pragmatic and blah blah blah. So I think that says so much that he's the owner, but it then plays into the drama as well, because if Holden is killed, they've got nobody who can mend their equipment and supervise their electronics, and that then leaves them in a parlous state. And it is an illustration of just how tricky things are on the planet, and how close to the edge this colony of well-meaning people is. And I think, and I love that the pioneering here is shown to be just the very nature of being settlers, is shown to be extremely dangerous, and where an individual human being is a precious resource who represents as much as what his skill set is to the fact that he's a person. And I think that's really, really interesting. So I love the Holden subplot and the primitive and that character and the performance, and particularly I like the friendship between Holden and the primitive. But I love the cast as well. I love that. Well, and I love the Norton subplot as well. I think that's really clever. It's a really good way of spreading a sort of a toxic presence spread amongst, because it would be all too easy for the colonists to all be lovely people who are just want to farm, but actually the fact that you've got Winton, who has to be quite headstrong, because again you can't be pioneers by being all fluffy. You need somebody like Winton who's tough and mistrusting and prepared to confront people and things, but that means he's also prepared to listen to Norton, who's there casting himself as somebody who's a victim, but is in fact there to cause trouble and to rock the boat. And I think that's a really clever subplot. I think it stops the colony from being just a place of boring nice people, which I think it was very much in danger of being. So I think that's excellent. I love how Pertwee clearly just doesn't like anyone in the IMC ship, and is prepared to sort of not hide that. And I love those IMC men. But Caldwell is a great character. Dent is a fantastic villain, and Morgan is a fantastic sidekick villain. And I love those three actors. I mean, in fact, every single member of that cast is a legend in their own way. Every single member of that cast list, and it's rare for a Doctor Who story where each person's got a really interesting story. Down to the two non-speaking parts, Pat Gorman, Doctor Who legend, the Where's Wally of Doctor Who, John Scott Martin, another Doctor Who legend, and even John Harrington, because I think he was German, and has an interesting story to tell about being a German actor coming over and working in the UK and changing his name, obviously anglicising his name, and clearly, obviously, having to work hard to disguise an accent as well, I would think. If he wasn't German, he was maybe Danish. I did know this, but yeah. And then those main actors, Bernard Kay, Doctor Who legend, 4 Doctor Who's, and also I have a huge history with him. Nicholas Pennell, the only one of the main cast not to have done another Doctor Who, but I think we forget, because he went to Canada, that his status as a leading member of the Forsyte Saga cast, and the Forsyte Saga was a massive and important series, and he wasn't long off that. Meant that he was a bit of luster there, and he's very good. He's the Juve lead basically. And then John Ringham, wonderful, who's gone from being one of Doctor Who's archest baddest, Tlatoxel, to being having been the revenue man in The Smugglers, to now being, who's a bit more of a heroic part, to now being lovely Ash. I love John Ringham, fantastic actor, very recognisable when I was growing up as well, from a Terry's Chocolate Orange advert that had an Indiana Jones thing going on, where he tries to get the Terry's Chocolate Orange to get chased by a giant boulder, and as Penny's dad in the enduring sitcom Just Good Friends, but and of course he's in Dad's Army quite a lot as well. But yeah, love John Ringham. Maurice Perry, again, I've been to his house and had an on-off communication with Maurice, and I think he's just unbeatable. He's definitely one of Michael Bryant's favourite actors, and I think unbeatable as a cold, inscrutable villain. But Maurice, has had a fantastic career as one of those faces popping up in everything, and was a remarkable man. He was a big old lefty, actually. Maurice, he was a red flagger, and he as I say, learnt Russian, was learning to sing as well. He was very active mentally, and when he could be, because he was caring for his wife, but he did get somebody who came round and helped as well, and was still driving. He dropped me off at Euston Station in his rickety old van thing. Tony Caunter, EastEnders legend, TV legend, Roy Skelton, Zippy from Rainbow, George from Rainbow, amazing voice man, Daleks, but gets a few on-screen bits and bobs too, and notably here and in The Green Death, and Helen Worth from Coronation Street. So what a cast. Now, it would be very boring for me to choose the cast, but I fear I might have to. But also, I feel I want to choose individual members of the cast, but then I'll feel bad for the individual members that I don't choose. And I definitely want to choose Bernard Kay at some point, but this is where I overthink myself, because Simon wants me to win. So is he surely going to go, well, Toby's got to choose Bernard Kay on his last Doctor Who story? But there's a moment that Bernard does later that I would maybe like to choose particularly. I could also choose any one of the looks that Maurice Perry gives when somebody says something like, do you want me to do this nicely? And he'll just sort of give a look as if to say, I'm not betraying anything here, but you know that this means that I don't want you to do anything nicely at all. He's great at saying so much without moving a muscle in his face. So the cast I will choose. Individual members at certain points, or individual things that they do, because there's a great Perry moment as well. There's many great Perry moments. Oh, but what I came away with most, I want to choose Bernard Kay. It would be really annoying, wouldn't it, to lose a point because I didn't choose Bernard Kay. That would, which means I've not been listening to my own podcasts. But I think, because it's particular to this episode, and I think it is my favourite thing about this episode, I think the relationship between Holden and the Primitive, and that little subplot, which is very sweet because it's nice, it's lovely, and it ends so horribly, and it leaves a really nasty taste, that unjust murder. And I do hope that later on, they had an inquiry and cleared the Primitive of Norton's murder and vice of Holden's murder, and vice versa, and all that backstory about the Primitives and the sort of fragile truce that they have, to show some of the practical differences of having to coexist. Colonization isn't just all about coming and saying this place is ours. There's negotiation that has to be done, especially, and I like it because they're obviously not there to wipe out the indigenous population, but to forge their own lives and live with them. And I think that is a very thoughtful treatment of that, rather than just sort of rather glossed over, like in the Macroterra, when so we went and established a colony and didn't care about the giant crabs, and then we're supposed to be happy when we destroy the giant crabs who lived there before we did. But that's a story with a different motivation and different ambitions for the kind of subjects it wants to cover, so we let that go. Anyway, I'm going to choose I want to choose Bernard Kay because he's such a good actor, and Caldwell is a great character. And one who could be very drippy and isn't, because Bernard's very strong and thoughtful and intelligent. But I'm going to choose Jim. Jim'll fix it for me to choose Holden and the Primitive as my favourite thing about episode 2 of Colony in Space. And now I'm going to cue up Simon Curtis to say, of course I'm choosing Bernard Kay. So that's the way to do it, to choose individual actors without worrying about upsetting the others, is to choose, and it's a lovely phrase to have been coined there by Simon, the IMC acting ensemble. And I should have done that, and that is a great scene, and I'd barely mentioned it because I was giving acting. It is great because I think, again, we think of Colony in Space as being a bit sort of flat and uniform, but all of those characters are subtly different, and there's a lot of scenes in the IMC ship, but I think they're really good because they are done very well by actors who could be playing types, but because Hulk is such a subtle writer of character, and because Michael Bryant has made sure he's got actors who will not just do the surface of the line, but actually bring their own little bits of nuance to the parts, which means that Bryant can get on with, directing the rest of the show, as it were. I love those scenes in the IMC ship because they are such interesting characters, and they are such well-played parts with such watchable actors. So yeah, that's a good choice of the IMC ensemble. So even though you're making it easy for me, Simon, and you've declared that you would like me to win, I'm still going to manage to screw this up for myself. I'm going to blunder headlong into it and foul it up, much like Winton. So anyway, I'm glad that one of us gave credit to those. Well, I gave credit to them. I was sort of preserving them for later, but I now can't choose them because there's no point, because I won't get the point, because the point for those three has been claimed. But they do all have individual moments that might end up being part of my choices later on. But it's not like this is official anywhere, or there's anywhere a Hall of Fame or a medal that is given out. I will be banging on about how brilliant those three actors were at various points throughout, and I hope you listeners will be agreeing with me when I do that, and with Simon when he's chosen them as his thing. But I was also happy to give credit to John Harrington and to Holden and the Primitive and that little part of the story, which is unique to this episode and I think is rather sweet and also rather sad. And again, all of this stuff is giving lie to the fact that this is just sort of boring and repetitive. And I know that is very much the reputation that it has. So I'm keen to make the barren beige vista that many see Colony in Space as be fertile with the green shoots of people thinking it's a good story. He said, as the metaphor withered on the vine. And I shall continue to to fertilize colony in space. And I don't know what image that's conjured for you, but I'm sure it's a delightful one as we go through the remaining 4 episodes. But for now, I hope Jim will fix it for you to have a lovely rest of your day, whatever it is you're doing. Take care. Thanks very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Simon Curtis. I'm grateful to Simon and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Stephen Moffat, Andrew and Lisa, Catherine Armitage, John Arnold, Kevin Ashelford, Luke Atkins, James Bell, David Bickley, Gary Byrne, Robin Bland, Robbie C., Alex Kafajoglu, Paul Carnahan, Paul Carrington, Andy Case, Ian Clark, John Curley, Mark Dakin, Rob Dawson, John Elledge, Mark Findlay-Smith, Joe Ford, Gary Gillett, Paul Goodridge, Lisa C. Greco, David Green, Fraser Gregory, and Paul Gregory. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like your name read out on the credits, that is just one of the many bonuses that are available when you become a Patreon at patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month, and at £3 a month you get everything. You can get bonus materials, interviews from my archive, behind-the-scenes looks at my DVD and Blu-ray extras, plus you get all of these releases many months in advance. I think it's about 6 months at the moment for Happy Times and Places, and maybe a month or 2 for Indefinable Magic and Too Much Information. There's also Far Too Much Information, which is an exclusive for patrons only, and also monthly AMAs, which are exclusive to patrons only. You can be a patron for free, but I haven't quite worked out what to give away there and what not to. So you can keep an eye on stuff and maybe make suggestions. But yeah, that's a new thing, and they keep springing new things on me, and I'm very old. So anyway, go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock, and that's a monthly commitment. If you don't want to be tied to anything for a regular amount of time, you can do a one-off donation to help keep the wheels in motion at kofi.com/Toby Haydock. And if you would like to support these unfinancially, but nonetheless still help out, that's still very, very welcome. There's no such word as unfinancially, is there? But there we go. You can do that by giving these 5 stars a thumbs up, by liking and subscribing, retweeting, and just giving all the attention you can, because it just really helps to get these noticed in that great big wilderness out there that is cyberspace, which is frankly teeming with Doctor Who and indeed other podcasts. So I need all the help I can get, like the clay underfoot of Uxarius. I need a sprinkling of anything that will make me flower and bloom. I'm all over social media. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Twitter twice, at Toby Haydock and at Haydock Podcasts. I've got a Facebook page. I'm on Instagram. And I have a YouTube channel that I'd love it if you liked and subscribed to as well. Because all of this stuff, I mean, in my business now, the more followers you have on social media, the more likely you might get to get a job in something. I mean, that's terrifying, isn't it? So all of that stuff really does help. So if you could then just ignore me. But any follows, likes, and all of that are much appreciated. You can't escape me on the internet. So I'm sorry about that. But if that sounds like fun, do join in wherever you can. Oh, well, it's quite a Sunday. I'm recording this on a Sunday afternoon. This is quite a Sunday afternoon story, isn't it? But I'm thoroughly enjoying Colonists. I'm really delighted at the feedback from people saying they particularly like this one. But then again, when I do a story that's a favourite, people say, "Oh, it's really great that you're talking about that classic." But it does seem to me that people particularly like it, because I suppose this is an annoyingly optimistic. Not like Malcolm Hulke himself. His vision of the future was much more caustic. He'd have hated Happy Times and Places. He'd have called it barren future and overbuilt location. But yeah, because I try and be positive, I guess it's slightly fresher. Because you see, when I listen to podcasts, I do like it when somebody says, I absolutely hated this, and lay into it. But that is not what I am doing. I have made my choice. But I am very pleasantly surprised at how many people have responded to that. So maybe that's a sign that we perhaps need more positivity than we necessarily think always. But it seems to me particularly that if it's a story that is undervalued, you'd like to hear a champion of it. And this has not been an effort. I've not been having to dig in the dirt. I could make an Xarius connection there as well, but it's I'm an hour and 12 minutes in now. I'm flagging, but I wasn't putting on a show there. I genuinely have really enjoyed this, and I do have a soft spot for Colony. Although I think I was a bit actor heavy then, won't I? I shall talk more about subtext next, possibly. Anyway, I'm off to do the rest of my. I've got a gig tonight, so I need to, and I've got to tidy. Oh, my office is a right old mess. So I better go and do the things that I'm supposed to be doing on a Sunday, not this. But I've enjoyed it. I enjoyed that. Hope you did too. And if you're not listening to this on a Sunday, I hope all this Sunday talk hasn't confused you.